A ballerina's perspective, from performing with New York City Ballet and Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater to publishing poetry books and mentoring kids and teens. Join us in a weekly discussion with experts to gain mental health clarity and achieve growth and moral consciousness. Give our show a 5 stars, comment, share, and come along for the ride. Welcome back to another episode of the Growth, Grace, and Gratitude podcast. Today we are doing a special panel with fellow men talking about masculinity and how what it means to be a man, what it means to lead an honorable life, a holistic life, and one that is surrounded by leadership, inspiration, and guidance. Because I think a lot of trends or themes these days are covering what it means to be a man, and the themes shift from generations. I feel like before there was a big theme of feminism, and feminism kind of, in a way, tried to erase healthy masculinity, not allowing men to kind of be themselves. So I think now we're slowly returning back to traditionalism. If you're ready to shake off that daily stress, come join us for online beginner, adult, ballet, and yoga classes each week to connect with the flow of movements and the art of ballet into perfect synergy. Come as you are and learn to love your body a little bit more and gain strength and flexibility with each class. All are welcome. Sign up at balletartsmovement@gmail.com. First class free. A more kind of alignment, which is holistic, but why don't we just get into it and start the conversation? I will read out the bio of my two guests, and then we can just kind of go from there. So we have Chris, who is an entrepreneur, and with his first business being his classic car restoration, working on older Volkswagens and domestic classics. And his second business is a legacy training for male entrepreneurs and coaches on legacy. He co-authored a book and it became an international bestseller in 2024, Cracking the Rich Code, Volume 15. That's amazing. So I think that would be a great topic to talk about. What is the rich code and why is that important in terms of like wealth and masculinity and leadership? So welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
And then we have Munib, a K-12 school principal. He has a PhD in communication and MA in school counseling. He has written a lot about masculinity over the years, including a children's book, and hosted a number of groups and conversations with boys of all ages. That's very inspiring, amazing. ClickFunnels easily build any type of online business and sales funnel in record time, no matter what your product, service, or niche, without any tech design or experience whatsoever. Try the ClickFunnels 14-day free trial, link in the description of the podcast. So why don't we talk about the passion for teaching men and boys? I think that's actually really crucial. Like, I remember when I was coaching people on the spiritual journey, I started coaching men. It just kind of sort of happened. I was normally channeling information, energy updates, inner child healing things, and a lot of men seem to gravitate towards connecting, healing, feeling. And I was super interested and inspired. I'm like, wow, this is really amazing how men are coming to me. It's actually connected me back to my own childhood and my own inner child, remembering how much fun I had, like just playing with boys in the park. And like that inner child connection, I think, just led me to connect to my own inner masculine essence. But I think it's really cool how men became so open and vulnerable with their emotions and feelings, whether they felt like they were going through a spiritual journey or they were going through some kind of trauma or upheaval, and they were so open to wanting help and open to kind of expressing where their life went astray or where they feel they need guidance in. So I thought that was really inspiring to listen to men talk about their problems, their journeys, their intentions. I think even when it comes to dating, it's so interesting how there are different groups of men. You know, some men are more traditional, they're able to kind of take that leadership role, and some other men are more passive, and they have been following a trend and they feel more in their feminine role, but it's a little bit toxic because then they kind of take a step back, they take a passive approach, and then the woman has to lead. Why don't you guys join the conversation and talk about your own passion for teaching boys, men, all about healthy masculinity?
Chris, you wanna get us started, or I can
Sure.
start either
You
way.
can
But
start.
yeah, I think for me, I've tried to think about kind of what was the kind of beginning impetus, and it's really hard to pinpoint. I think I grew up with, I mean, a wonderful father, but he was often busy. So I was often, around my mom and my sisters kind of growing up, two older sisters. So I think that was kind of the start of a lot of realizations that I had of kind of just, I was always very quiet, very much an observer, very much kind of comfortable in, not being super competitive, not really into the things that I could pretty quickly see were kind of more kind of stereotypically like what boys were supposed to be into. Um, and I think there was like a realization early on of kind of how harmful some of these messages were, like around gender to girls, because I think I would see my sisters being hurt, right, by these messages that they received around them. So I think that's where it started. And then I think just kind of growing up, especially always being around education and then having two sons myself, just very quickly realizing how some of the choices I would make weren't necessarily like in line with maybe more conventional masculinity, and kind of seeing the responses that would get, but also seeing how powerful that would be, especially for young men and young boys to have a man, to see a man making some slightly different choices, right? Like whether it's in the music I listen to or the movies I would say I am really interested in, or just being aware of like, I mean, video games are a big part of my life with my sons and kind of having conversation around, some of the tropes in video games, right? Around like the damsel in distress and kind of some of those things. Like I've always been fascinated by like media literacy. So, and then having been now in a K to 12 setting for almost 10 years, and having had a hand in kind of one-on-one conversations with boys, group conversations with boys, and kind of really seeing one, exactly what you pointed out, right? Like this yearning that many boys and men I think have for connection, but maybe not always feeling like they have the permission to socially, especially around other men. As you shared kind of what you saw men sharing with you and how beautiful that was, part of my thought in my head was, I would wonder how comfortable many of those men would feel sharing some of those same things with other men. Because I think as I do more of this work and kind of am in this space, I see how much of kind of the mask that men put on really is performing for other men, even more so in ways than like performing for women.
Sanger Daniels' online seminar promoting a positive message of self-healing with bioenergy work together with live seminars and remote coaching. Use code BIO20 for a 20% discount for our audience. Link in the description of the podcast.
Right? There's this very much this kind of desire to be seen as a man by other men, and this constant fragile state of like, are all the other men in my circle still thinking of me as a man? I have to it's like this very fragile dance that I think a lot of men kind of find themselves in. And so I think over the years I've really felt found a lot of like fulfillment in especially helping young men and boys kind of better recognize how they develop their own ideas of what it means to be a man, and kind of giving them permission to know that there are lots of options out there, right? And they can kind of choose to be any of these ways, right? If they want to get swole, if they want to, be into cars, like that's fine, right? As long as like you're doing that because you're interested in those things, right? Not because it's some pressure you feel that, well, if you're a man, you have to be into these things. So I think having those conversations, I just really love having those conversations, and I've found a lot of kind of personal fulfillment, and kind of seeing changes in the young boys and men I've worked with has just been incredible. So I think that's just a little bit of kind of, I think, part of the work that I find myself always drawn to.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
I had a completely different childhood, you could say polar opposite to you, because I was raised more by my grandparents while my
Oh,
mom was working full time. So and also my father figure wasn't really there. It was more my grandpa who went through the Second
Mm.
World War. So you have the influence now of the great generation on the Gen Y. So I really don't fit in that regard because I've been raised as if I'd be a boomer, but I'm not a boomer, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't have family yet. I really want to have family, and I've been single actually for the last 14 plus years. So I've been able to put a lot more time towards like business, spiritual journey, personal growth, figuring out stuff, and building out more. It's been, you could say, a bit of an uphill battle because, again, being raised by a single mom, yes, grandpa is there as a father figure, but you don't really have a father figure that are influencing you. So you're kind of learning the hard way, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. Yeah. And then, I mean, business wise, I got it more into the automotive bit because my mom was always taking me to the car shows. So that became a mutual passion. And really, the way things are now, it's more the automotive work is stress relief compared to the online business because I can do that for a bit to get out of my head.
thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. Yeah, I think that's very vulnerable for sharing your intentions with dating and relationships. I think it's so easy for men to just go from one partner to the next and kind of seemingly appear unbothered and totally cool, but that repetition or that behavioral pattern that's just afraid of being with themselves and trying to figure out
Mm.
either what is their problem, what is their unhealed pattern, or what do they actually want. That's a struggle, and that's what separates a lot of men from the crowd of the toxic men, because I think that's so vulnerable. Like you mentioned, your journey, what your intentions are, what you're looking for, that's beautiful, and I hope you find what you're looking for, because it does take a lot of courage to put yourself in a position to kind of know your past, know what you're looking for, and then to work on yourself. That's, I think, the whole gift of spirituality for men and women, is to kind of be in that space of opening yourself up and allowing yourself to feel the intimacy of your emotions and your journey. And I think, what do you guys think about if there is an attack on masculinity right now? What is your take on that? Because I know this is a big theme that people are talking about. If you guys have any personal experience or anything to add about this topic. Podpitch is the first and only software that finds, writes, and sends pitches to podcast hosts from your actual email address. Podpitch will make sure you get podcast bookings, guaranteed. Link in the description of the podcast.
I don't think I would describe it as an attack. I think there might be like a reckoning happening with masculinity. I think I hesitate to call it an attack because I think, to me, that feels kind of in line with some of the patterns, like on an individual level, that I think are problematic that I've seen with masculinity, right? Where if somebody points out gives some kind of feedback, some kind of critical feedback to a man, it's very, it's not uncommon for that feedback to be taken as an attack, right? As a personal attack, which to me really reveals more of like this um, really struggle or kind of lack or inability to really reflect and have a certain amount of self-awareness, right? Where maybe like some kind of critical feedback is, I feel like calling it an attack would betray more about like the person calling it an attack, if that makes sense. As just like, I'm feeling attacked by this criticism of masculinity. I think I've seen many spaces who, with lots of totally valid critiques of like problematic patterns of like the tied to masculinity, right? So sure, among them there's maybe, unreasonable ones, sure, right? Like it always kind of, that is kind of inevitable. But I think as a whole, I personally don't see it as an attack. I think I see it in line with kind of this bigger movement or energy or just kind of thing that's happening on a global level of just kind of what feels like a forcing of us to have to like reckon with things that we've been trying to avoid over the years. As a society, we've tried to ignore, we've tried to hide, we've tried to avoid. And it feels like everything is coming to the surface and we're kind of on a macro level being forced to kind of come to terms with it and reconcile like what is it we want to stand for? How is it we want to move in the world? How do we want to continue being? You know, I think some of how you were describing it in terms of feeling like kind of a movement pushed it all the way and kind of a little too far in one direction and kind of swinging back. I think that kind of idea of equilibrium is really powerful to me. It feels like we're having to come to like a new equilibrium of like, what are the forces we want to be guided by? Because the world's been kind of guided by, very generally speaking, by masculine forces for a long time.
Unlock your best life with Soul app. Book a holistic wellness experience with a trained guide and start changing your life today with compassion practices, inner healing, food and diet, and so much more. Tap into a healthier and happier life with the #1 purposeful living app in the US, the Soul app, link in the description of the podcast.
You know, and it feels like there's maybe a shift now, kind of that's kind of being really interrogated more than it has been in the past. And I'm hoping that it will kind of get us all to a place where we can kind of find a new balance where we're not just living fully in this masculine space, but find a way to bring in some of that feminine energy that is so crucial to everybody's development, right? Just not just on a personal level, but on like a collective level.
Very interesting perspective. Yes, that seems to be occurring for sure. Yes, go ahead, Chris.
I would just say, I mean, the attack, maybe if you look more at the bigger picture, because, I mean, go back to, like, I wanted to talk about, you know, the rites of passage and stuff. Like, this is 1988, where they actually talk about, physical fighting on the cover. That doesn't happen nowadays. Like, that stopped. You have books, or another one, like, this is honestly a really good one on masculinity and stuff, because these ones cite stories from, like, these are old fairy tales, and he goes through them on masculinity. Like, you have the Firebird. Let's see, I'm trying to get it in the camera. If you can read those. Yeah, stories from all around the world. Yeah. So the Firebird from Russia, the Water of Life from Germany, and he breaks them down, how they influence people. They're not, like, these days, they'd be, you could say, a little bit in your face, the stories, but then again, when these were written back in the day, I also got a book talking about the folklore and stuff from, like, Norway and Sweden. So the oral history of the, you could say, the Norse wolf warriors, the Ofendar and stuff. And again, that's very similar teaching, the folklore and stuff, how to teach men to become boys, how to teach them to stand up, how to fight to become strong. What are we lacking these days? We got weak men everywhere. We got people who are not willing to stand up and fight for anything. You see stuff in public, you see, like, crimes going on. Everybody's passive. They have their phone out. They're not doing anything. They're not stopping it. They don't care. Like, the problem is weak men. Like, you see what, we should go with the fall of Rome. Weak men create all the problems. We're at that point and that precipice. So now the question is, are we going to continue? Are we going to continue following? Or are we going to rise up and fix the problems we've created? Because these problems did not start yesterday. These problems started in the 1890s. They've been going for several generations.
Exactly. Yes, I love
Chris,
that.
could I ask her Chris, could you elaborate a little bit? I'd love to. I'm not sure I'm fully getting kind of when you say these problems or kind of weak men. Could you kind of help me understand a little more what you're speaking of when you're talking about weakness? Kind of, you talk about fighting. Is it kind of strictly physical strength? Can you help me kind of better understand kind of what you're
and
going
spiritual?
from?
It's all three. You have the physical strengths, you have the mental strengths, and the spiritual strengths.
TeloVital supports focus, energy, immunity, sleep, recovery, and resilience. Start feeling better today on a cellular level with zeolite, super green juice, micronutrient gut support, and more. Get over 50% off your first order for TeloVital. Link in the description of the podcast.
If you look, most of society has become atheist or agnostic. They do not have the spiritual connection anymore. Mentally, they lack the strengths to debate, to challenge others, and do it in such a way without getting into physical conversation. It's either that
Mm.
or they go separate directions. And then physically, I mean, that's the most obvious. You got weak men, you got people out there who say they're strong when they're really not. Like physically, they can't go and fight for themselves. They can't defend themselves. They don't want to get into fights.
Mm.
That's a very interesting perspective, and yeah, I do agree with that in a way, because like you mentioned, when men are scared to pick a side or pick what they represent, it's hard to be around them for sure. I mean, I remember having a few friends, and we were going on a like a treasure hunt or something, and it was dark outside. We had some men who were like looking, trying to find a way to help the others, and some men were just like passive and not even in tune with the reality of. And I think that's the beautiful thing about men, that we as women look up to men to be the leaders, and we can be leaders too, and we are leaders as well. That's one of the great values of men, is to be the leader. That's where men take pride in leadership as well, knowing what do they have to lead in. I grew up dancing ballet, and we had boys in ballet as well, and we have class with boys, we take bar with boys. But then when it comes to the center work and partnering, the girl is on her point shoes and the man is not, but he has to lead her. So she's standing on point, kind of vulnerable, having to twirl, and the man is giving his hand out, and he has to lead her around in circles, like, picking her up across the floor, and he has to be strong enough to carry her through these portals and these timelines. We do help each other 100%, but like you mentioned, Chris, it is true that more men, and I think this can be society's teachings or trends that people pick up, where it is toxic feminism kind of leading the men to be more in the back. So men wouldn't have a voice. They would feel uncomfortable to even speak their thoughts, speak their values, speak their opinions. And this is where toxic femininity kind of took like the front row, and a lot of women started wanting to be the lead. And in a relationship, especially, do you guys have experience in partnerships where it comes to leadership? And what is your take on like healthy men and partnerships, if you guys want to share?
Well, I mean, I've
Yeah.
been dating for such a long time. You can see, because I've been seeking out the feminine woman, and that seems to be the rarity these days.
What
You
is a
brought
feminine woman from your perspective, so we can also have
a
that kind
feminine woman, no tattoos, no piercings. Like she's in her feminine energy, so she's willing to more like she'll keep her hair down. Like she'll be helpful, kind, courteous. You know, like if she's working in a service job, like she's not gonna go and exacerbate any problems. She wants to mitigate the problems. If she's depending on other careers and stuff, like the way society has pushed women where they have to get a job, where they have to do more, it takes away from the family. They can't have family, hence the decreasing birth rate. You have on top of that, I mean, the push for the contraceptives and stuff, which has gone into the water supply, which if you go a step further, that gets into the water supply, that reduces the testosterone in men, that weakens men. So it's a twofold right there. And yeah, you have other people have said it on Twitter. You have feminine men and masculine women. So, and then you have them trying to date each other. It just that repels. That repels. It doesn't work. Like that's why you have the red pill men yelling at the feminist women, because they both are like they don't attract. They repulse because they've gone to the two extremes.
Yeah, I think you seem to be coming from more of a traditional perspective, and that's a breath of fresh air, I think, because it is a more pure perspective. And there are a lot of people returning to that essence, because that stands true to kind of lead a holistic family. We can talk about parenting. I think
I feel like I would, disagree with some of what I'm hearing. I feel like to me, some of that perspective feels kind of sounds pretty restrictive to me, and kind of I feel like it's kind of filled with some fallacies in there in terms of kind of making some connections, right? Like, um,
which part
yeah,
seem restrictive, just so we can.
yeah, just in terms of like, and Chris, this is something you shared, but it's something I've seen in many spaces, right? About what are we meaning when we describe femininity? What does a feminine woman mean? What does that mean in terms of how she looks? What kind of work she does? And so I think sometimes that's described as kind of more traditional, but I also see it as kind of restrictive. And I think part of it is that we're kind of in this middle space, kind of like how you were describing, Ari, of like, we're kind of it feels like we've gone from one extreme to the other extreme, where it was like there was a time where like women were very, very, or many women, right? There's definitely been women throughout history who've always had to work, right? Women of color have always been in the workforce, in ways that gets lost sometimes when we talk about the 1950s and women not being in the workforce. Where now, yes, there absolutely is maybe more of a pressure for like getting women working, but I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily agree that that's also necessarily like a negative thing in itself, right? Because we're also like in the middle of all this. There's also like the fact that we're living in a pretty extreme, unchecked capitalistic society, right? That kind of brings its own rules and kind of expectations. So I think I would be more inclined to think about when you talk about healthy relationships. I think there definitely is some value to what you're saying in terms of like men living more in their masculine and women living more in their feminine. But I think there's a lot of middle ground there for kind of each relationship to be fully open and honest and healthy, so that if in one person's relationship, um, the man is the person who is the main breadwinner and the woman is the one who stays home, and that's what they've discussed and it works for them, great. If another relationship is the opposite and that's what works for them, like fantastic, right? I think the piece that I find more worrying is when people feel pushed or pressured to live a certain way because there's this social pressure of, well, if I'm not doing this, then I'm not a real man. If I'm not doing this, then I'm not a real woman. Because I think that living with that tension is what I think causes a lot of issues, right? If I'm a man and my wife is the main provider, I have struggled to find a job. Um, there's a world where I can feel comfortable in the fact that I have this loving relationship and there's this support for our family. But where the tension can come in is if now I'm feeling like, oh, these men around me are mocking me, are making fun of me, are defining me as less of a man. And that's where sometimes I've seen then problems in relationships arise. So I think I would be more inclined to kind of allow for that freedom of letting, people define themselves in certain ways, right? So that femininity or masculinity doesn't necessarily have to be tied to, what you look like, how you dress, or anything like that. That all of these energies and forces live in all of us, right? Like the things that are more traditionally masculine, the things that are more traditionally feminine. The more I do this work, the more I'm drawn to the concept of yin yang, because I think is really a powerful visual, right, of like the masculine and the feminine, and the fact that they live in each other and it's a constant flow of like back and forth, and finding that equilibrium to me feels like more of the goal. With obviously, men may be more inclined towards this way and women generally more inclined in this direction, but kind of recognizing how they work together as well.
Yes, very nice perspective. And yeah, I think it's true about the restrictive part. We shouldn't be restricting men or women from their potentials, from their desires. And I think there is something about the, like you mentioned, capitalist. You can also think about, though, it's like survival of the fittest, right? We learned Darwinism in school and how sometimes you have to try to work hard. The idea of healthy competition is what drives us to achieve great things. Aligning to the biology of men and women is pretty simple. I think at the core of it, biologically men do want to work and do want to achieve great things for the family. And biologically, women do want to stay home and, have children. Societally, that has shifted by, different teachings or different trends or different experimental things that people want to do, which is fine. People go on a journey, souls want to experience different things. But at the core, I think people feel most balanced when we are aligned to our biology. I think that's a healthy tool to kind of keep us grounded. But of course, there are shifts. Sometimes women, they have kids and then they want to go back to work and they want to work full time, and then they have to, readjust. There's a whole host of different things that occur. To be open to all different kinds of, I guess, portals. And today is actually a portal. Today is the 999. If you, right? Do you guys celebrate or talk about this? Because I was talking with my friend about spirituality, numerology, and it was a guy friend talking about nine is about completion, conclusion, closing cycles. So it's also could be very heavy emotionally. We're shifting ancestral timelines and figuring out what we want, what we feel comfortable doing, how we want our divine gift to be expressed within the universe, whether we are female, male, whatever our soul wants to express or channel. I think a lot of men have started channeling, which is so beautiful. And it's like there's so many men who are coming forth and just sharing their truth. Like you guys are sharing your truth here. So I think that's really beautiful. And when it comes to parenting, I feel like we all have experience, whether it is growing up, like you mentioned, Chris, with your grandparents. I think that's actually a beautiful gift because not everyone has that as well, not, and even though, like you said, you didn't have a father figure, I mean, it's still beautiful to have grandparents. They are like the core of wisdom, to your lineage. So I think that's also beautiful. So why don't we dive a little bit into parenting? And I think you wrote a book, Munib, Raising Better Boys, which that sounds very cool. So tell us a little bit about the book and your perspective about parenting. I think that's a very important topic.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many places to go when we talk about parenting. Definitely something I'm very passionate about, for sure. I think, writing the book for me really came from, um, I mean, I feel like I've done a lot of work in writing around masculinity, around parenting, and kind of the impetus for the book really came from I was sharing, I think it was online somewhere, um, because I think the conversation started to started talking about the Manosphere, red pilling. Adolescence had just come out on Netflix, which is incredible. If you haven't seen it, really highly recommend. And so I was in a lot of spaces online, kind of talking about all of that. Um, and so I think somebody had asked something like, just kind of looking for help, like what can we do to help our boys? And I just shared something that I did with my oldest son, who's 17 now, that especially with my background in media, like media literacy was always really important for me and in my parenting. And I feel like I shared this kind of little activity exercise I did with my son, who as he was getting older, he was starting to ask about watching R-rated movies, and I was saying, like, there's definitely R-rated movies you could see now as like a 12-year-old. There's some that you're gonna have to wait for. Or I think maybe he was 14 or 15 at the time. But I was like, you know what? Like, if this is something that we want to start doing, which I generally, kind of depending on the movie, don't totally disagree with, because R-rated movies are such a spectrum. But I was like, let's watch a few things together first that I want you to kind of start thinking about, because kind of over the years, I've come across documentaries and various video series on YouTube that I love, that I think do a really good job of specially breaking down things like the representation of women in media, things like some of these problematic patterns of kind of masculinity in media. And so we kind of sat down and watched some of these things together, had conversations. I was like, if we're going to watch these movies, there's going to be more violence, there's going to be more kind of sexual content. I want to at least open the door to have these conversations now, so that when we do watch it, if you have any questions, we can always kind of talk about it. And I got a really great response from people when I kind of shared this thing. And so it kind of inspired me to write this in terms of like around a few key areas that I find myself really uh, being drawn to more and more. Because I think like a few things that I really focus on in that book in particular are like um, the the kind of danger and slippery slope of jokes. Like that's one thing. Like especially working in a school, I think the bulk of like these problematic things, if you want to call it toxic masculinity, you want to talk about misogyny, whatever you want to call it, you know, often in schools kind of almost get a free pass because somebody says, no, I was just joking, right? I was just a joke. It was just a joke. And how crucial it is to really interrupt those, right? Because they are problematic and they need to be stopped. And as I've kind of tried to dive into, what people call the Manosphere and all these spaces, like a lot of it, especially for young boys, starts out in the form of memes, right? In the form of jokes, in the form of these really harmful messages that are being shared in what appears to be really harmless ways that kind of creates this kind of slippery slope of like, well, somebody has a phone, they're not being necessarily supervised because, they're 14 and they have a cell phone and they see an image they think is funny, they share it with 20 other friends and they're all laughing. And maybe on the surface it's pretty harmless, but really it's contributing to just this culture of normalizing misogyny, normalizing this way of relating with each other as boys, which is really problematic, right? Like now I'm connecting with this other boy by talking down on girls, right? I'm relating with this other boy by making a joke about domestic violence, right? This is now how and it's just a joke. Don't worry about it, right? Which is really, really hard. So that was like kind of one area I really focus on. And media literacy, I think, is really, really crucial. I've had this conversation with parents and, with various people, and it's like, I've come to really feel like, there's no way to prevent boys from seeing harmful content like that. We're past that. If they spend more than 10 minutes on YouTube, if they go anywhere online, they're going to see content that pushes, dangerous ideas about women, dangerous ideas about what it means to be a man. And so I think for me, really what I'm finding myself more and more drawn to is how can we empower them to have the analytical tools so that when they do come across these things, which they will, whether it's porn, whatever it is, so that they know how to like identify it, interrogate it, push it away, reject it, or like seek help for it, right? Like, hey, feeling comfortable being like, I'm not really sure what this means, finding a trusted adult that they can go to, right? So I think those are the pieces that I'm trying to kind of think about. As well as accountability is like another big area I'm finding myself drawn to. So those are some of the things that, especially particularly in that book, are kind of my areas of focus.
That's amazing. I think it's such an important part of raising kids, especially boys, because it's like, how do you discipline them? But also you want to be open to their feelings and their sensitivity. I think a lot of boys growing up these days are so sensitive, and maybe this is because they're like becoming more spiritual at a younger age, but they are, and to allow them to be sensitive and not to shut them out as well, because it's like they are already sensitive so young. That's also a beautiful thing, because that means they are growing in compassion. They're going to be able to be an amazing friend, partner, brother, son. It's like, it's so wonderful to see so many little boys and how they're growing up. So yes, as a father figure, as an adult, to discipline in that way, it's so hard as well, right? Because it's like, you want them to be strong, you want them to be smart and capable, but also to be emotionally abundant and emotionally aware. So yeah, it's such a beautiful thing you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that emotional intelligence is another area that I'm like, I feel like that's the key in so many ways. I keep coming back to this idea of how it feels to me like a big source of issues that boys and men are going through kind of comes down to what I feel like is, a lack of emotional intelligence, for lack of a better way to say it, right? Like a lack of ability or capacity to really sit with their own feelings, right? Really sit with their own discomfort, which I think is such a crucial step to accountability. Like if you do something that hurts somebody, somebody's going to hopefully call you out on it. You're going to have to recognize that you did something wrong. That doesn't feel good. And you're going to have to be able to sit with that feeling of, I messed up, and then work your way through that to choose to do better, right? And if you don't have that skill, which unfortunately a lot of boys and men are not encouraged to develop that skill, what happens is they get called out and they lash out, right? They feel attacked, like you were just saying, right? Like they feel attacked. It's too much to literally, like, they don't know how to take care of that energy. And so they turn it back on whoever's around them, right? They lash out, they engage in risky behavior, they drink, whatever it is, anything to not sit with the discomfort of their own feelings. And I feel like that's a piece that I'm finding myself drawn to, especially as I work with boys and, like, young men at a school, like, every day, kind of encouraging that sensitivity, right? If I hear them saying, like, I'm really sensitive, and being like, that's awesome. That's like a superpower, right? To be sensitive to other people's feelings, to be aware of how you feel, to be aware of how other people feel. Like, we need more of that, because the world is lacking that right now. So if you have it, like, don't ever lose it. But let's learn how to manage it. Let's learn how to cope with it. Let's learn how to channel it to improve yourself and the community around you.
100%, yes. And Chris, you want to add as well to something that we were talking about? I know in your go ahead.
Well, going on your points about the whole Manosphere bit, there were a couple high-profile entrepreneurs who actually spoke out about that. Like, Bedros Keuilian in California, who's worth like 9 figures. He spoke out about the Manosphere, how they lack integrity, and how they just constantly belittle women instead of building families, building community. You have Alex Hormozy. He spoke out about it, and he's on his way to he's working his way to become the next billionaire. Again, he spoke out about it. You see his posts on Twitter, and yet the people who are in the Manosphere in that community basically attacking him, calling he doesn't know what he's doing, yet he's been married for how many years and he's made how much money with his wife. Like, he knows a lot more than these people want to admit. Like, I mean, when you go to childhood rearing and stuff, I mean, there are a lot of books. This is another one on rites of passage, but this is masculine and feminine rites of passage. It's one of the few that talks about how the male rites of passage and the female, how they're different, how they can grow into their own energy, how to become who, to their highest potential. And yeah, I mean, I'm hoping, I got quite a lot of books to go through, but I'm hoping to go through as I meet my person, as we're able to have our family, to use them to actually go through the rituals, the rites, and what's needed to grow, almost like raise them as if they were born in the 1900s or I guess the 1800s, because it was falling out of fashion around 1909. So 1800s, when these were all still alive and well in society, understanding their rights, their roles, and also building the resilience to deal with what all is going on in the world.
Chris, after this chat, I'd love it if you could send the titles of those books in the email thread. I'd love to check those out.
Yeah. Actually, I could send you there's a web page that has them all listed.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think when we're able to read and to connect with different timelines, and we learn so much of how it used to be, how we would like it to be, and what we want to include or exclude based on it being toxic in the past, or some things are great and we want to bring them forward into the future. So yeah, it's very true. Like, people who are traditionalists or people who focus on religion, they have to bring some parts of the past, but they have to also be wary of cycles that they want to leave in the past. So I think a lot of spiritual men are also connecting with those dots, which is amazing, because it means they are self-aware. They are able to see the past as having, polar experiences, where some things are great to pick up and some things are just toxic and can be left in the past. And I think on my own journey, just as a female, it's wonderful to connect with men who are aware of that, because a lot of times the women were the ones suffering a lot, and the men had to kind of take that toxic role. So when men are becoming more and more awake to the realization of what the feminine went through, I think that's the most beautiful thing in a partnership or in a friendship, as you're able to understand what men went through in the past as well as women, and to kind of heal together. I think that's the beauty of connections in today's age.
I mean, Ari, the other thing is, like, we have the term toxic masculinity. There was a pastor at the church I was going to. He moved away at the beginning, like March of this year. He went to Alberta from BC. And he was very critical of that term, because that was basically going and telling men to stop protecting women. That was telling men to stop having integrity. That was telling men to be weak little bystanders and to fall almost to the route of the red pill, which that I would call is more toxic than actual masculinity.
Yeah, I don't think that was ever my takeaway from the term. I think toxic masculinity as a term has definitely become like a hot button topic, right? So that it's like
Yeah.
there's so much that it has come to mean. It's been used and kind of manipulated to mean various
Highly
things.
manipulated.
Right. But I think for me, the way I've only ever like thought about it and have kind of made sense of it, it's like another way to describe it would be like talking about the patterns that are generally present within masculinity that are harmful to yourself or others, right? Like within ideas of masculinity, there are things that, if taken to the extreme, can be harmful, right? So, generally speaking, masculinity means being stoic, right? Not showing emotion. And so, to taken to an extreme, which it's often has been, right? Meaning not taking care of your own well-being, being emotionally abusive or manipulative to people around you, that's now becoming toxic. If a general expectation of masculinity and what it means to be a man is to be dominant, there's a positive take on that, which is taking on leadership roles, which is taking care of the people around you. But a toxic version of that, an extreme version of that, is oppressing people, suppressing people, winning at all costs, not caring about other people. Toxic masculinity has, unfortunately, and I think try to be mindful of that, right? That like I think especially if I am talking to men, I generally try to avoid that term because it can be taken as pretty immediately critical of kind of all men or masculinity. But I think it's also very valuable to kind of acknowledge that like, yeah, like a lot of really horrible, horrible things have been done under the kind of banner of man, right? Of masculinity. And so I think being mindful of that history and that, like, yeah, taken to extremes, there are things within masculinity that can be really harmful to men themselves as well as to the people around them. So I think, I try to be mindful, like not thinking like, oh, toxic masculinity means like all like being a man is a bad thing, or you have to be submissive at all times. But I think unfortunately, like that term has really kind of been warped and overused, maybe, is the thing.
Yeah, well, there's a
Right.
Netflix documentary that's, I think, called Toxic Masculinity. That's what the pastor brought up. And it is basically going and talking about all the extremes, which you mentioned, and using that as the example and trying to
Right.
exacerbate the problem. So,
Yeah.
like, where's reality versus what people are told to believe? And where can people actually realize the line is not where it's supposed to be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think to me, I try to think about like ultimately, like I think the biggest change, the most significant change is going to mainly happen on like individual levels, right? On like men getting together, people getting together and having those conversations in smaller settings. Yeah, books can help for sure, right? Podcasts can help. There's these spaces where maybe we can help expose men and all people to kind of these different ideas. But ultimately, even when you're talking about like in a relationship, kind of the role of the man, the woman plays at like the end of the day, like each of us can only control what we do, right? And we're only ultimately responsible for our own actions, right? So in my mind, it's yes, I'm in this partnership, I'm in this relationship with the woman I love. We have a responsibility to each other, but I have a responsibility to myself to make sure that the choices I'm making are aligned with the values I say are important for me as a man, and which we as a couple have also, some of those we've agreed on, some of those maybe we differ on a little bit, right? but that part of it is like, I can do what I can do if I'm saying this is what I believe in, and hopefully always work to improve and better myself as well as work on this relationship together.
Yeah, it's very true. I think having that independence is also crucial, because you don't want to become so codependent where it becomes,
Mm-hmm.
that can become unhealthy for sure.
Right.
And having a level of healthy codependency is great, because it's obviously part of a
Mm-hmm.
partnership. You want to know where you can rely on one another, and also where you are afraid of relying on yourself as well, because I think we do
Mm.
have to go into our inner child sometimes to really reconnect to our interdependence and our ability to be interdependent. So I think there's so many sides to a partnership for sure, where we're always learning and growing, right? Like this week
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm too codependent, and the next week it's like I want to be more independent. It's like we're allowed to experience different cycles as long as we communicate our feelings and
Right.
our intentions with one another, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, this was a really long, beautiful conversation, longer than I anticipated. So, guys, this was super, super cool. We
Awesome.
can do part two sometime if you guys would like. It was a really wonderful conversation.
Yeah, sure.
You both brought so much inspiration and wisdom to the community. So I'm sure a lot of men and women will listen to this and be inspired to just like rethink what is their value, what is their intention behind healthy masculinity, and what it
Mm.
means to be a man in today's world, which is challenging. The more we can begin to appreciate men to the point where women do not bash or hate men, which has been a huge trend. If you guys want to share any last words, or where can people connect with you guys? And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, this has been a great conversation. I think, yeah, I recently wrote a similar thing as you just said, right? Would love to get to a point where I'm not seeing all this bashing from both sides, right? Like men bashing women, women bashing men. And I think ultimately, like, I'm really invested in myself, but also if there's any kind of help I can provide other men, especially to kind of find ways to start moving that needle, right? Because there is a burden on men, I think, to shift the collective narrative on these problems, as well as there is for women, sure. But like, that's not right. I'm not a woman. I don't identify as a woman, so I'm not taking on that responsibility. My responsibility is over here with how to shift the narrative
Yeah.
on men. So that's what I focus on, so I don't have anything negative because I'm going to, do that. But yeah, please, you can find me on threads, online, at Munib Razai. Yeah, I've got a couple of ebooks, a children's book on masculinity, and love doing this work.
Amazing.
Yes, if they want to find me, it'd be easier on LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn/Christopher Bauer. Instagram similar, but just add 4 at the bottom. It's Christopher Bauer 4. My name's kind of common, so I didn't get the first one. And yeah, I also have my website, which will be linked through the LinkedIn, and on my banner, it is the Leaving Legacy Live bit. I also have a school group, which is a free community that if men want to join, they can look it up. And it's called the Legacy Collaborative. So they can, but that ties back to the website and to the LinkedIn. They're all kind of interconnected. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so
Awesome.
much, Chris and Munib. It was such a beautiful conversation. And come back anytime.
Thank you so much, Ari. Really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Welcome back. We are doing series on healthy masculinity, what it means to be a man in today's society, growing, evolving, healing, going through different cycles of evolution. And today we have Andrew and okay. So I'm gonna
Right.
yeah, we are connecting with men and talking to them on the journey of ascension, growth, and just learning about different perspectives and different journeys from the man's point of view and also from the woman's point of view. So thank you guys for joining me. We have Jason, Jose, and Andrew. And I thought it would be great to kind of start with where your passion began for connecting with the masculine energy and what your what your work is all about. So Jose over here, a doctorate in Chinese energetic medicine, and he helps people live authentically while minimizing stress, anxiety, and more. All about a centered and balanced life leads to a centered and balanced man. Very true. And I think it would be great to talk a little bit about the foundation and understanding of different aspects of masculinity when it comes to balance. So thank you so much, Jose. Tell us a little bit about your work with Chinese energetic medicine, which sounds very, very aligned with spirituality and holistically healing.
Yes, it really is. It's completely different than your standard TCM that you would find anywhere else. So, I'm Jose Mendoza, doctor of Chinese energetic medicine. One of the main things that I do is not just help people live centered, authentic lives, but I help men transform their lives as well. It's a complete holistic system. And as I was referring to, when you look at TCM, the modern standard Chinese medicine we have now, they're missing the spiritual component of the medicine. Lots of political reasons for that there's no need to get into. But just know that the work that I do incorporates that missing element back in. And that's one of the ways that I can help to bring people back to their center point, back to who they are, and live authentically.
Very true. Yes, I think the spiritual element is the exact missing thing that a lot of people are also craving to either understand within themselves or to get clarity on when it comes to physical healing, mental healing, emotional healing. That spirituality aspect, yes, 100% is so true. So thank you for bringing that up. And next we have Jason. He does shadow work and he leads men's groups through evolutionary man and teaches men embodiment and healthy relationships. So thank you so much for joining us and talk a little bit about, I think shadow work is super important. I think that's a lot of us empaths, and whether you are a man or woman, there's a lot of shadow work involved in trying to integrate different frequencies and experiences. So please tell us a little bit about your work as well.
Sure, yeah, I'm a men's guide and group facilitator, and I've been in men's work for about 20 years, which really just
Wow.
started with my own journey in terms of I literally started going to men's groups to heal and get the support I needed to, yeah, learn and connect to what healthy masculine was, as it was pretty absent in my life. And now I'm super passionate about getting guys connected to each other, particularly through men's groups. And oftentimes, right in parallel with that, getting them more embodied. So helping men drop out of their heads, deeper into their bodies, where lo and behold, that's often where emotions live. And so if we're not in our bodies, we're rarely feeling our emotional experience. And most men are severely undertrained in terms of what their emotions are, how to identify them, how to name them, how to work with them. And when they don't, lo and behold, we tend to stuff them. That kind of man box, bro, macho culture keeps us locked in isolation. And not knowing how to work with that, often these emotions stay in the shadow. What do most men do? They turn to substances outside themselves to try to change how they're feeling on the inside. Alcohol, overworking, TV, sex, you name it. And long term, as I imagine Jose knows, uh, you stuff that stuff down long enough, it shows up as physical ailments and real tension and struggle with men who particularly what I find is a lot of guys, we kind of come in with a certain amount of you could say chi or energy on our debit card, and we just crank through our 20s working hard, partying hard, living hard. Then you start to hit your mid 30s, 40s and beyond, and this stuff really shows up and takes a toll on men. So my passion is just pushing back against the default, particularly here in the West, in the United States where I live, hyper individualistic macho man, Marlboro man culture of hold it all inside, be tough, be stoic, because it ends up killing men. The stats are pretty bleak, in fact.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's so true. It's also what is the narrative on men, what is the current trend, or what is the societal influence or impact, because there is different kind of storylines that are drilled into young boys that they don't even know which direction to take oftentimes. So it's really breaking into the forefront 100%. And next we have Andrew, who is a medicine man and inventor. So very interesting. Tell us a little bit about the work you do.
Sure. So, hi, nice to meet you. So my name is Andrew, but but when I'm wearing this, when I'm hiding behind this thing, I'm known as Coyote Blanco, which is basically white coyote. Um, I'm a sacred clown. That means I have decades of experience in medicine and ceremonial stuff. But I mean decades, not as in I took a workshop and then I did a thing, but more as in I was trained. And so now that I'm 39, I've had plenty of time to go beyond the focus of the thingy and end up lining up alliances for environmental sanctuaries where we apply and implement cognitive technology that I invented as well. That's why it gets really funny. And with this, we help restore and rebuild social fabric across vast expanses of land. I'm experienced. I am the first cultural implementer by the Comnapaz is the name. It's a National Commission for Peace and Nonviolence in Mexico, and we are the only citizen movement that has presence in the country's Senate. This is important because I am heard by those people by legislators. And also, I am a member of Native American Church of Turtle Island. This is a church, not a religion. This is important because Native American Church of Turtle Island it's a branch of the original Peyote Church, which was made to protect Native nations' traditions and medicines, which allows me and gives me permission and mushroom more than out, because I'm also trained as a clown. And for rehab and whatnot, it's necessary. You guys have said it. We exist here because we're more neurotic than ever. We're in the craziest version of humanity we've ever seen, and this is pretty banana. And so to tackle this, I'm the one who has taken the time to go, all right, so most people are walking away from medicines and whatnot because, like, sacred medicines and whatnot. Yeah, okay, I'm going to walk in the other direction. I'm going to learn the thing and come back so that we actually have the thing, not just the tourism. Because one thing that happens is the health of the individual has to exist with the environment. Our minimum size is ecosystem. And we need to understand that, because if we don't, we will forget that we exist, and fabric and all the things that we so much enjoy exist thanks to native nature and for eternity. Cult of war and death and destruction and stupidity, willing stupidity. So, as a sacred clown, my job is to remind us all that we have a celestial dignity. It doesn't matter what you call whatever spirits you believe in. This is not about belief. Life is really sacred. Life is really sacred. And so what I do is I do this all around. I talk to drug dealers. I talk to civil organizations. I sit down and I make peace agreements. And then I enforce them. So I am a clown. I am a spiritual counselor. I am an active member of a church, which counts. It counts. But I'm also trained in crisis and in peace building. So I constantly and continuously dedicate my time to doing that. Setting up communities so that they evolve beyond their current limitations. And and also I set up access points where people can receive the services that they desperately need when they're in crisis. Because the world, those who are sticky with blood from, like, on the street, those people, you'll find them on the street. So I go and I find them on the street and I catch them and I bring them over to the side of life. And the nose helps because, most laugh than to kill someone. That's a brief intro. There's way more, but My name is Andrew, and nice to meet you. Thank you for having me here. It's really an honor to be here, guys. Thank you for your work, guys, by the way, and thank you for your work, Eric. This is much needed, right?
Yeah, thank you for your work as well and for describing everything. I think it's interesting that you're embodying the sacred clown, like you mentioned. Yesterday, we had a conversation with some men on the podcast as well for this series. And we were actually talking about, like in schools, how boys will start to kind of make fun of girls, and they start, I think, prematurely using the sacred clown archetype, if you will, without understanding how to properly access their inner child, like trickster or something like that. And I think when it comes to growing up as a man, the idea of the clown archetype is there is a level of truth telling there. It's like you mentioned, bringing chaotic energy to the forefront and helping people to see beyond the veil of illusion. And so yes, there is something about that trickster energy, to use it with responsibility and accordingly to reveal the paradox, and using creativity by acknowledging the destruction. And as long as the satire doesn't go towards cruelty, because that's what boys growing up today are aligning themselves with, a sense of cruelty and condescension. So if any of you guys want to talk about the clown archetype, archetypes of the masculine role that you think is good to align with, please add in your thoughts.
I would like to add one thing about the clowning thing. It's a distinction that I do, which is, for example, if I say a joke, it's only comedy if we're all laughing together.
Right. If
If
the
I
if the intention is to unify, right, and
no
not
no, it's
to.
not. No, here's the distinction. It's not the intention. It's the result. Because if I'm going to clown around, I know how to make you laugh. I know how to connect with you. I don't care who you are. I know how to connect with you and make you laugh. And the distinction is, it has to be in that direction. There is no other. Because of the whole laughter it's a forward movement in life. But forward means we all move forward. That's the distinction that I would add because that's one that most people miss. Oh, boys will be boys, but boys are terrifying creatures. How boys do we want to be? Sometimes boys are more like bears, like jaguars, and it's very dangerous to be around them. No, it's but it does have to do a lot. It is directly connected to how we see ourselves and how we allow ourselves to exist and be witnessed by those around us. You know, even if we don't consider ourselves particularly fine.
100% yes.
Yeah, what I sometimes, maybe to contextualize with part of what we were just talking about there, is one of the challenges I see is, there's talk of toxic masculinity and healthy masculinity. And, where I stand, there is no toxic masculinity. What there is disconnected masculinity. What happens when we get disconnected? So when we disconnect from self, our heart, when we disconnect from other, our impact on other, and then just like Andrew was talking about, what happens when we feel disconnected from literally the world and environment and ecosystem we are part of? And usually when men come to me, they're feeling a mix of one or sometimes all of those things. And it's only when a man is disconnected in these ways, particularly from his heart and from his impact on the other, that we can cause these deep harms. But as men reconnect and feel the impact, masculinity itself is just an energy that all people have access to. It's the disconnection that is so brutal, and that we are literally often as boys trained into, right? From an early age, even, it's different around the world, but how many times have we heard, stop crying or get up, be tough, you're fine. And what this starts to teach boys from a young age is whatever's happening in your body, override it with your head, right? Override it with your head. Then we get into school. And what lesson do often boys get? Sit still. Stop moving. Oh, you're moving a lot? You have ADHD. There's something wrong with you. Override that impulse to move in your body. Then we get into middle school, kind of adolescence. And what are we taught very quickly? Boys' bodies are changing at a different age. The pressure starts to come from other boys. If there's any difference, you're attacked for it, right? If you show any vulnerability or any emotion, oh, he's a da-da-da, you can just think of all the adjectives. Attacked for it. So what do we learn? Override what's going inside, put on this posturing front. Then we get out into the workforce. Same thing. What are most men rewarded for? Oh, he works 60, 70, 80 hours a week. He's so tough. He's so committed, right? What's the cost of that? Often our well-being, our health, as Jose talks about. And so from a young age, we're actually rewarded for being disembodied and being disconnected. And part of, the importance of the work these guys are doing, you're doing with making voice space for this on a podcast, is creating the counterculture that no, we need more connected men who are connected to themselves, who are connected to others, and are connected to the ecosystem, the land, the actual planet that they are part of. Because when we're disconnected from it, we can trash it, right? We just see that time and time again, the degradation of the earth we live in. So for me, the most important thing we can do to men is get them connected to self, to other, and to the land.
That's so beautifully said, Jason. I 100% agree. I think so often the disconnection leads to complete brutality, mind, body, and spirit. And yes, I think the first step is connection or reconnection, because that will totally help men lead their own sovereignty as well as lead whatever they are leading, because men are here also to lead, which is a beautiful thing. It means that they are worthy to lead. I think that's also something that we have to acknowledge with women and men, to not bash men and not hate men for their leadership if they are doing a wonderful job, because that is part of their, I think, destiny and life purpose. And depending on what they choose to lead, that is going to bring a sense of intuition, a sense of unity. We all thrive in communities where men take that role consciously. And I think that takes so much work. And yeah, Jason beautifully explained that. Jose, would you like to join and add as well?
Absolutely, I'd love to add a few things. When Andrew brought up the idea of the sacred clown, and when you started to mention about the archetypes, and of course, as Jason touched upon, how there's two aspects to masculinity. The way I see it is not that there's necessarily two aspects of masculinity, connected, disconnected, but more so one hasn't grown into the other. You have masculinity and you have boyhood. And too many men enter their lives as boys and continue to be boys. They've not received the lessons, they've not received the understandings, they've not stepped into those archetypes that exist for us. And even within the archetypes themselves, there's two. You have the positive, or what could be called the yang archetypes, and you have the ones that lean towards the more negative, or the yin archetypes in that regard. And going back to the example of the clown, for example, Andrew's work is great. As a sacred clown, he's working towards that yang aspect where he helps other people and they both laugh together. But the yin archetype of that's a clown with a closed off heart who cannot handle the realities of the world anymore because it brings too much pain. And so, in order to disconnect, as Jason said, he laughs and he pokes fun at others. He laughs and he pokes fun at other events at the expense of others for his own sake. There's an interesting story that was told to me where this lady who had been in a car accident went to go retrieve her car from the junkyard. And there were these two men that had been there. They'd been working there for quite some time, several decades, I believe. And so when she showed up and pointed out her car, they began to laugh. And she was very confused. Why are you laughing? And they said, oh, because we made a bet between the two of us. We do with every accident that comes through as to whether the person is living or not. And so I lost the bet, he won the bet. Because they could not handle the reality that they're constantly seeing cars come in with the constant reminder that somebody probably died. And so that disconnect then causes them to joke so they don't have to think about it. And that's a big aspect that's missing amongst men. We're not connected to our feelings. We're not connected to our emotions. They're gross, they're icky, they're not fun. I'll fight an alligator, I'll scale a mountain, I'll do all these things. But if I have to turn inward and feel, no, I don't want to do that. And that's the mindset. So then the heart closes off. We shield ourselves and protect ourselves from the world so that we don't get hurt. And in doing so, we're bringing about less benefits to everybody because now we're not in our masculinity. We're not in that yang aspect, that true archetype. We're sheltered, we're closed off, we don't want to be bothered. And that's truly a sad state because in my line of work, it's all about bringing you back, opening the heart, and connecting you back to yourself authentically so that you could connect to your source and your higher purpose. And then from there, you're able to express yourself to the fullest extent, be a true masculine man, and share that with others.
Wow, thank you so much, Jose. That was beautifully said as well. I think 100% true. And that's like the gift of the awakening journey so many men are experiencing, because internally they are craving to be acknowledged for their feelings and emotions and everything they're thinking and experiencing, and that they have been neglected, because a lot of our inner child wounds start to come out when we are going through adolescence, early adulthood. And that's when we don't want to feel, we want to kind of numb it down, but it starts rising higher, because I think the soul journey is calling out for that initiation. And I think we each experience that on different levels and in different ways. For men and women, they all experience different ways of awakening. And I know my journey was all about reconnecting to my feelings as well, because as a kid growing up, I grew up dancing ballet, and we didn't have to talk, we just had to dance and perform. And at one point I was like, I want to understand what my feelings are and how I can put them into words, which took a lot of work to instigate, to try to understand what am I feeling. So I can imagine for men it's super challenging, because women are in a way taught to gather in groups and talk about your feelings, to the point of it becomes like toxic gossip. But men don't have this kind of set up in the way women do. So I can imagine it's a huge challenge. And can you guys share a little bit about any tips for boys growing into young men? How can they become holistically healthy with their mental state, to try to acknowledge their emotions without rejecting part of themselves?
May I?
Yeah, sure, go
Maybe
ahead.
tackle the question. So here's the thing: we are smart creatures. We have intellect and smartness in us, but we rarely use it consciously until life squeezes us hard enough that lemon juice comes out. And you're like, but I'm a person. How did you get lemon juice out of me? And life goes, yeah, just hold my beer and watch this again. Um, so, to where I'm heading with this is the thing that I teach the most when I go to school, and when I work with both young ones and elder people who are still young. Jose mentioned it very like they're still boys in adult sized bodies. Although I love how both distinctions of the like child and adult and the connected disconnected, like you know, it's ridiculous. But anyways, where I'm headed with this is we have intellect, we have smartness. If we want to acknowledge our and move through with our emotions forward with all the thing integrated. The easiest way to do it, as I've learned, is there's two things. One is sniff and growl, because this is a cognitive button. If you need to clear your mind, sniff your thoughts. Only you make that noise. Out of everything in cosmos, only you make that noise. And that your nervous system will take as white noise. So it will take advantage of that to clear out whatever noise is happening. And if emotions get too high or the thoughts are too bleh, you growl to bring them down to your body. This growl will move you and shake your vagus nerve, among other things, and it will particularly impact your fascia, which is it's a fascinating topic. That is one thing. And the second one is, while you're at it, if you're feeling things, how about you express them, but not just like, oh, hear me out and before we have to get there, before we have to get there, we can walk around willingly, brandishing what we feel and expressing it in a constructive way. How do I teach it? Positive bullying. Well, constructive bullying, which is, I am going to bully you with compliments. Why? Because I'm going to give you a compliment and there's nothing you can do about it. Also, this compliment is going to be perfectly innocuous. For example, right now I have three of you in front of me, and I'm going to compliment you, and none of you can stop me. So, first, how dare you exist so elegantly through your struggle? How dare you raise every day with your spirit the hearts and souls of those who feel broken? How dare you bring them about into this healthy place where we can live and see a world different? How dare you, you sacred creature? See how it works? I'm using the same intellect that I would use to bully anyone. It's the same intellect that I could use to go, hey, look at me. Or I could look at you in the eye and then point upwards and make all of us lift our gaze and go, isn't this amazing? This movement opens up the space so that we don't have to reach the point where someone goes, yeah, yeah. But of course, if they reach the point, you can reach out to us, you can.
That's brilliant. Yes, thank you so much, Andrew. Very, very great point.
Yeah, I could speak to it maybe from a different angle, and
Yeah,
that's
sure.
um, I actually put a lot of responsibility on this on us men, meaning the type of healthy masculinity these two fine men are pointing to and that we're talking about. It's an embodied transmission that the quickest way for boys to learn is to spend time around other men who are holding this kind of deep presence. To see a man who can hold his grief without falling into collapse, to see a man who can bring forward his anger or fury, but still feel completely safe and in control of it, or to see a man who knows how to touch his fear or be vulnerable and move. Literally, how does he move his body through the space? How does he breathe? How does he make eye contact? That chain of transmission is part of what has been destroyed in a lot of our cultures around the world, that some indigenous cultures still have access to these kinds of rites of passage, like we were talking about, of we need boys to spend time with healthy older men. And while there is a growing, at least in the work I do, men's work, movement to bring rites of passage back, the reality is they have research around this. Something as simple as a single intervention, meaning an older man puts his attention on a young boy and shows that he cares. That's it. Just, I care what's happening in your life. What are you doing, or what's going on here, can completely alter the trajectory of a boy's life. And so many boys don't have that. So, it can start in something like fatherhood, big brother programs, even just getting involved in your local community and grabbing a kid, taking him out for a walk. This is the level I think we need to engage at right now, which is very personal, man to man, and doesn't have to mean you have to, take custody of this boy or anything, but just to develop a relationship and put your attention on him and invite him to spend time with you, or spend time with your brothers or uncles or whatever that might be, because that used to be a big part of the experience, and that's mostly been eradicated. And when we don't have that, what happens? boys are left to be raised by social media, mainstream media, and other boys. And none of that is doing a sufficient job right now.
Terrifying, but that last one is terrifying. When they're raised by other boys. Ugh.
Yeah, and I think that's so beautiful that you mentioned the ancestral part when we have the wisdom of grandparents or older adults who are carrying those codes to help the boys grow into young men. It's such a beautiful gift that what a wonderful thing to acknowledge and also implement into our society. So yeah, that's so beautiful, Jason and Jose.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed what everybody said so far. And like to touch back with what Jason said, for boys, it's incredibly important to seek out mentors as they get older to receive that transmission and that understanding, people that they trust. It could be an uncle or it could be someone else. Because too many young boys don't have access to that masculinity. Their fathers are not great examples of it for most boys. And so, like myself, I had to go and find other people to try to fill in those gaps. And over time, as you start to learn and see these things, then you can start to step into what your own masculinity is. Because otherwise, if you just have your father and your father's not great when it comes to masculinity, that's how you perceive it. If your father's the type of person that goes and drinks on the weekends and mistreats his spouse, you will think that that's what masculinity is like and therefore do the same. So there needs to be something else that's given to boys. And typically that's the chain of transmission, as Jason was talking about. But also, I think what's really important is two things. You need to let them have their physical activity, including roughhousing, because when it comes to roughhousing for boys, that shows them how far they can extend themselves before causing someone else harm. And that's the importance of roughhousing. You're sitting there, you're both playing, you're both having a good time. At what point do you stop so you do not hurt the other person? That helps to build the compassion and that helps to build that control, the self control that's needed later on in life. The other thing that's really important, in my opinion, is remember that it's not necessary to react. In other words, when you have an emotional flare up, you don't need to release it in the moment as you think it needs to be. For example, anger comes up, someone may punch a wall, someone may yell or scream. Those are all methods that are used to remove anger as it comes up. But that's a reaction, that's not the emotion. And so, what's helpful for boys, for them to be taught at a young age, is when that happens, to say, okay, and verbalize it. I'm really upset with you right now. Or I'm frustrated that this happened. Hey, back off. What you're doing is making me mad. That's how we get these boys to start to understand and attach these emotional feelings to words and be able to communicate that with other people, thus giving them their power back. Because otherwise, you have this emotion come up. I don't know what this is. I don't know how to put it into words. Nobody else. Well, that guy likes to just rip paper, so I'm just going to rip paper, and that's it. That's the end of the story. So, really, it's about building them up from a young age in order for them to learn. That's the reason why there was apprenticeship, journeyman, and all of that in the trades many, many centuries ago, is because you had to go and learn under one person first. And then from there, you journeyed around and learned from as many as you could to hone your own skills and then open up your own shop and thus be your own master, who then passes on what you've learned, that accumulation, to others. And if we could show a little breath control, if we could remind boys, breathe through the nose, breathe down low into the belly, and know that it's okay to feel, I think we would be in a much better place.
So beautifully said, Jose. Yes, thank you so much. And I could talk with you guys for so much longer. We can do a part 2 for sure. Thank you so much, Jose, Jason, Andrew. What a beautifully vulnerable and holistic conversation we've had. I think this would benefit so many people who tune in and try to really understand how sacred men's work is and how inspiring it is to hear from the man's perspective talk about healing and integrating and shifting the collective consciousness from being asleep to awake. It takes so much bravery and courage and motivation to keep going and to keep fighting the good fight. And it takes discipline. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this episode. And where can people connect with you and see all of your content?
You can keep up with me, the men's groups I run, programs I run, podcasts, etc. at evolutionary.men. So it's not .com, but .men.
If you don't mind, I'll jump in. So you can find me. You can find me on TikTok. TikTok is where I run most of my videos. I'll give it to you in text. It's called Un Profeta que Teje, which basically translates as weaving prophet. It's a whole play of words. You can find me there, and also in Spotify. I have a podcast called Historias de la Hurricane, which is like stories from the hurricane, or the hurricane stories. That's the little thing that we did when the pandemic hit and everyone was depressed. Um, in TEDx, the Google TEDx thing. I didn't want to let go of the opportunity to tell you guys how beautiful you are. Mwah, there you go. Take that, you healthy men.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. So, and yeah,
You could find me. I have a podcast that I've just started, Taoist Dude. You could find that on rss.com at Taoist Dude. You could also read some of the things that I post through threads at JMDCEM and also on Instagram at JMDCEM. But I also have a website if you're wanting to work through some issues that you're stuck in, and that's risetohuman.com.
fantastic. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me on the podcast. And I'm sure our listeners will be jotting notes and connecting to their inner boy, and hopefully they're going to work through some things and become better humans on this planet. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
You
Thank you.
guys. And love you listening. Mwah.
Thank you guys.